news just broke that members of the U.S. military committed literal war crimes on the express orders of Pete Hegseth. And the details of what they did and what he ordered them to do are so bad that it is now all but certain that Americans will be prosecuted for these crimes. Earlier today, the Washington Post reported that in September, Pete Hegseth explicitly ordered SEAL Team 6 to every individual aboard a boat off of the coast of Venezuela. Hegseth was very clear at the time about his expectations. He didn't want any survivors left alive. But after the smoke had cleared following the initial missile strike, at least 2 survivors could be seen clinging to the wreckage. And that is when this man, Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, ordered a second strike to ensure that the survivors were also. But fun fact, that's a war crime. You can't double tap survivors. And all of it was captured on video. A video that the Pentagon is now refusing to show to members of Congress, despite a bipartisan request from the Senate Armed Services Committee for them to do so. And just imagine how bad that video has to be if they won't even show it to other Republicans. And here's the thing, y'all. The Trump administration argues that the United States is now at war with the cartels, and that as a result, the use of lethal force in the form of missile strikes is totally legal, y'all. They have to argue this, of course, because the president would otherwise be ordering extrajudicial attacks on civilians, which is illegal. But by framing these strikes as happening within the context of an armed conflict, Trump might have protected himself legally, but he also ensured that service members are beholden to a set of legal standards that Pete Hegseth is ordering them to disregard. And as a result, those service members can now be prosecuted for war crimes. International laws for armed conflict, which the U.S. military obviously has to follow, dictates that enemy combatants who are seriously injured can't be executed. Essentially, the instant that it becomes clear that the person you're fighting, your opponent, has no way of fighting back, you cannot them. You can capture them, you can prosecute them, but you cannot them. In other words, all of the legal framework that the Trump administration has spent months building around themselves to give Trump the right to order those strikes, yeah, that framework does everything to protect Trump himself, but it does nothing to protect the service members carrying out the strikes. And some of those service members are now going to learn the hard way that I was just following orders don't mean jack shit when you're the one on trial, friend.
Guys, welcome back to the channel. Now I want to give credit to the original creators of the clips in this video, and of course thank you guys for always supporting the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that like button, don't forget to subscribe and join the conversation in the comments, because I really want to hear what you have to say about this.
The Washington Post has reported that Pete Hegseth ordered the killing of unarmed civilians in the water who had survived one of the boat strikes in Venezuela. The Senate Armed Services Committee announced that they are investigating those claims. It's a bipartisan investigation. It had the GOP chair and a Democratic senator. And so did the House. The House Armed Services Committee is doing the same thing, and it is also bipartisan. So questions, can Pete Hegseth be charged with war crimes? Kind of depends on what you mean. If you're talking about international crimes like the ICC, the Hague, that's not going to be anything. We are not a member of the ICC, which means he won't be arrested here and sent there. He could be arrested in a member country and sent to the Hague, but we have legislation that if an American citizen is arrested and sent to the Hague, we can send in the military to go get them, which would certainly happen. So I would not expect anything to happen there. So what can the investigations do? Same thing that happened to Pam Bondi. Remember when she went before Congress and refused to answer any questions because she didn't want to perjure herself? She did that because she knows that these investigatory committees can refer criminal cases out to the DOJ if they think the law has been broken, which they're obviously not going to do in this administration, but they could do it in the next one, using whatever evidence they find in these investigations. But perhaps more importantly, at least in my opinion, is that he can be impeached. The process for impeaching a cabinet member is exactly the same as the process for impeaching the president. So it would just require a majority vote in the House and 2/3 vote in the Senate to remove. It's really tempting to want to see him in jail, right? And I totally get that, and I think he should be in jail. But I think the thing that we should focus on is trying to get him out of the job first, because the jail part's probably going to have to wait for a new administration. But the reason why this matters so much is because these investigations are bipartisan. They are Republicans that chair these committees. They've probably seen the polling just like we have, that 70% 70% of the country does not approve of what we're doing in Venezuela. So this is just yet another example of Republicans in Congress starting to get a little itchy about this administration. And we want to encourage that every time it happens.
Donald Trump, upon Air Force One being asked by a reporter, has just publicly responded about the second strike that was ordered by Pete Hegseth. And it's kind of interesting. It's audio only, so I'll let you guys take a listen to this.
On the Venezuela boat strike, if there were a second strike that killed people wounded in the first strike, are you thinking that would be legal?
Number one, I don't know that happened. And Pete said he did not want them. He didn't even know what people were talking about. So we'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted that. Not a second strike. The first strike was very lethal. It was fine. And if there were two people around, but Pete said that didn't happen.
Does that make you
I have great confidence.
He's saying there's no second strike?
I don't know. I'm going to find out about it. But Pete said he did not order the death of those two men.
It's very interesting. You know this is bad when Donald Trump himself is trying to distance from it, saying that I don't think that Pete Hegseth actually did that, but yes, that's bad, and I myself would not have ordered the second strike, which we all know he would have, but the public distancing is something that we don't always see with MAGA, so watching them start to publicly distance from the situation means that it's probably going to end up pretty bad for Pete.
Okay, listen up because this is important. Pete Hegseth is not a war criminal. I understand why a lot of people are saying that, but it is not a helpful way to talk about what's going on. The reason why this is not helpful is because if you call him a war criminal, you are accepting the Trump administration's premise that we are a country at war when we are not. There is no authorized use of military force. Even Trump's own Office of Legal Counsel, the OLC, which is putting out whatever Trump wants, hasn't put anything in writing that justifies this kind of thing. Will Pete Hegseth be a war criminal? Maybe. Because if you've been paying attention to the news, you understand that Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration want to invade Venezuela. If not invade, at least use traditional military force to decapitate their government, which would cause a massive amount of chaos throughout all of Latin America. Let me make it clear for the MAGA morons who might be watching this video, even though there's just a few of you. I'm not saying that Maduro's a good guy. He's not a good guy. He is an authoritarian just like Donald Trump. That's why I don't like him. Maduro engages in extrajudicial killings. Maduro also disappears people. But back to Hegseth. Hegseth ordering a double tap, that is, hitting a target once and then hitting it a second time to ensure that you've eliminated all of the survivors, is illegal, no matter what. Now, in addition to Pete Hegseth, and this is also important, everyone throughout that chain of command who authorized that second strike especially, they also committed murder or engaged in a conspiracy to commit murder. And all of them are subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And that includes any civilians who may be working with special operations or the Navy to facilitate this kind of thing. Remember how just like 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump was calling for a bunch of Democrats who served in the military or in the CIA to be tried for sedition, which he emphasizes the penalty could include execution? Well, they were right. Everyone who serves in the military, from the very top to the very bottom, knows that it is your duty, your legal responsibility to refuse illegal or unlawful orders. Now, I think we all know that we can expect Donald Trump to issue a pardon for everybody up and down the chain. But we, the people, we shouldn't decide that prosecutions and investigations are unnecessary because Donald Trump will ultimately make sure that every one of his co-conspirators get away with it. We still have to exercise as if this democracy still works. And if the pardons are issued, we don't ultimately lose. If the pardons are issued, it is because we are still doing the right thing. We are still working to protect justice. And every time that Donald Trump goes out and does something that's so egregious that even MAGA is horrified by it, it weakens his coalition. And look, I know that Democrats might be a little skeptical or gun-shy about impeachment, but Donald Trump can't issue pardons to save himself or anyone else from being impeached. And that includes Pete Hegseth. And let me tell you, it would be a fuckload easier to impeach Pete Hegseth if Donald Trump issues him a pardon. So let's do our democratic duty, call for investigations, make sure that we've got all of the facts. Congress needs to fulfill its role. And let's put the pressure on the Republicans to impeach the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Donald Trump doesn't have loyalty to anyone. You have never seen him maintain loyalty to anyone when they get too expensive for him. So he will eventually dispose of Pete Hegseth. And the world will be a safer place without Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense.
Donald Trump seems to be setting up everything to blame Pete Hegseth for the war crimes murder in the Southern Caribbean. Since the bombshell Washington Post story was released earlier this week, Donald Trump has taken steps to distance himself from the action that was taken. He said that, well, he wouldn't have done a double strike. The second strike he said he wouldn't have done. He then went on to say that Pete Hegseth said that it never happened. He also said that they're going to get to the bottom of it, seemingly suggesting that they're going to have some type of internal investigation into the strike. To me, what that says is, well, everything's going to be Pete Hegseth's fault if there was a double strike, or a double tap strike is what it's officially called. And well, Donald Trump is going to say from the beginning, I was not a supporter of this. One problem for Trump: he's the commander-in-chief. And I'm not sure what's worse, the fact that he says he doesn't know what happened in the Southern Caribbean, where the military is launching missiles at boats, or that he does know, is feigning ignorance, and is preparing to lay his Secretary of Defense out to dry.
This is a real post by a Trump supporter. This is what winning at life looks like. MAGA is trying to sell Pete Hegseth as a family man. But the woman in the photo is actually Hegseth's third wife. He had an affair with her and impregnated her while he is married to his second wife right here, whom he had an affair with while married to his first wife right here. She was only one of 5 women he cheated on with while married to his first wife. MAGA family values for you.
Well, we know why they lost their minds when those 6 lawmakers reminded troops that they could refuse unlawful orders, that a Nuremberg defense wasn't valid, and that they could face personal responsibility for any crimes they commit. See, regardless of what you think of those men on the boats in the Caribbean that they're blowing out of the water or what they're doing on those boats, ordering to kill all of them when they cannot fight and they pose no imminent threat of attack to the United States is illegal. Even if we were actually at war with those traffickers, which we're not, it would still then be an order to show no quarter, aka a war crime. Which is why the United Kingdom decided a few weeks ago to stop sharing intelligence with the United States about these trafficking boats in the Caribbean, because they did not want to be complicit in the United States military's illegal strikes on these boats. And they're not alone. Canada and Colombia have also stopped sharing intelligence for the same reasons. See, they had to make that video to remind the troops that when Trump is long gone and Hegseth and all the rest of the inner circle are sitting and hiding in Argentina or Saudi Arabia or Russia, the troops that were responsible for carrying out their orders will be sitting in prison.
Pete Hegseth is going to jail when this is all over, and so is anybody else who followed his illegal orders, especially after giving the order to have 2 survivors stop surviving. And the only thing that military and legal experts are debating is whether or not Pete Hegseth is going to be going to a military jail or your good old-fashioned federal prison. Because these strikes may or may not have been part of an actual war, because they're just bypassing Congress and doing whatever they want. Either way, he better brush up on his bathtub gin recipe, because he's gonna need it.
Mark Kelly just grilled Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth live on CNN, showing the entire world he is not afraid of them. In this first clip, he's addressing the fact that Donald Trump is blocking all migration, legal or not, from third world countries. Take a look.
These are legal immigrants that he is talking about.
He's kicked out legal immigrants already. This is kind of more of the same from this president. When he says things like third world countries, what is he really saying? I think what he's saying is he doesn't want brown people in our country. And that is disturbing, and it's un-American.
He's absolutely right. If you remember, just a couple of days ago, the official DHS account was advocating for remigration. That's a euphemism for the mass, oftentimes forced deportation of anybody in this country who is not white, even if they're a U.S. citizen. But Mark Kelly also said this: we have a president who doesn't understand the Constitution, who installed an unqualified Secretary of Defense. I cannot think of a Secretary of Defense in the history of our country that is less qualified than Pete Hegseth. He should have been fired after Signalgate. Pete Hegseth was put in charge of the Pentagon not because he's qualified or has experience, but because he's loyal to Donald Trump. Mark Kelly is pointing out what many experts have warned: putting unqualified loyalists into top leadership positions is not a good idea. Hegseth has now been caught violating the Geneva Conventions, committing a war crime. Trump's decisions have directly impacted how the military operates, how intelligence is handled, and how crises are managed.
This is a real post from the United States Secretary of Defense now mocking striking individuals in the Southern Caribbean, using Franklin to mock war crimes, or rather, I should say possible war crimes if the Washington Post story is confirmed. Title for your Christmas list: a classic Franklin story, Franklin targets narco-terrorists. And then you have Franklin from a helicopter with what appears to be a bazooka of some sort, targeting so-called narco-terrorists in boats off the coast of, I'm assuming that's Venezuela. And then you have more people in boats here as well. Now let's take a step back. Imagine if Secretary of Defense under Joe Biden, Lloyd Austin, made this post. What would the reaction be from the media and from those on the right? Now apply that same reaction to Pete Hegseth tonight.
I have a kind of a confession to make. I thought Senator Astronaut Mark Kelly was talking about me and us when he was telling the military not to fulfill illegal orders. I thought he was saying, if the president tells you to round up influencers, you cannot. No, he was talking about this. He was saying, if Senator Kegsbreath, former Fox News host, drunkenly tells you to do war crimes, you have to not do that because you can go to jail too. That's what he was saying. There were whole ass sections added to the military code of conduct following World War II because just following orders was no longer deemed a justifiable excuse for doing war crimes. You can't just do that and use that as an excuse anymore, right? Nuremberg trials, anybody? There are one-to-one examples of this following World War II. Military officers telling people under their command to shoot survivors of an attack. This was during war, and those people were hung. Law experts have been pulling their fucking hair out about the military posturing in Venezuela this entire time, and that was before we knew about Pete's little backhanded shit. This is so fucking bad. I cannot describe to you how bad this is.
This is exactly the charade we pulled off when we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq under false pretenses and left it completely unstable when there were actually other resources that we wanted. I cannot stress that this is exactly what's going on right now with your tax dollars and my tax dollars at a time when our economy is tanking. If this were about drugs, if this really were about the drug problem, we'd be attacking these countries first. Mexico dominates the smuggling of most illicit drugs across the southwest border. They are the primary source for fentanyl, meth, heroin, and a significant amount of cocaine to the U.S. Colombia remains the world's primary producer of cocaine, with sources indicating that 98% of the cocaine seized in the United States originates there. This cocaine is typically shipped through the Pacific or Caribbean and then moved through Central America and Mexico. Peru and Bolivia. These are the other two major source countries for coca production in the Andean regions used to make cocaine, though most of their products are consolidated through Colombia for the U.S. market. Central American nations, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, and Belize. These countries serve as critical transit points for cocaine moving north from South America to Mexico. The Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. These Caribbean nations are major transit hubs for drugs, primarily cocaine, moving via the Caribbean corridor. China. While not a source for plant-based drugs, China is a major global source of precursor chemicals used by Mexican cartels to manufacture synthetic drugs like fentanyl and meth. And then Ecuador. Ecuador's coastlines are increasingly used as key departure points for drugs, especially cocaine, alongside Colombia. Venezuela. We finally reached fucking Venezuela on the list. It's primarily considered a significant transit country for cocaine originating in Colombia. However, U.S. government data indicates the majority of U.S.-bound cocaine, around 80%, moves via the Pacific corridor, largely bypassing Venezuela, making countries along that primary route, Colombia, Ecuador, Central America, Mexico, more significant in overall volume to the U.S. market. Let me tell you something else about Venezuela. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, 300 billion barrels, even larger than the reserves in Saudi Arabia. The biggest donors to Donald Trump's presidency was Big Oil and all the LLCs and subsidiaries and so forth. Look it up. The ones that donated over $1 million have direct ties to the oil industry. Saudi Arabia cozying up with Donald Trump to get access to this oil in Venezuela by using your tax dollars and my tax dollars, and then pissing on us and telling us it's raining. In other words, it has to do with this drug problem they made up, is ludicrous. This is crazy. And we have madmen at the steering wheel bypassing Congress and every other international law and just going around killing anybody, and now we're going to invade their country.